Welcome back to the CNN Republican presidential debate in Miami, Florida. Mr. Trump, let me start with you. Last night you told CNN, quote, "Islam hates us." Did you mean all 1.6 billion Muslims?
I mean a lot of them. I mean a lot of them.
Do you want to clarify the comment at all?
Well, you know, I've been watching the debate today, and they're talking about radical Islamic terrorism or radical Islam, but I will tell you there's something going on that maybe you don't know about and maybe a lot of other people don't know about, but there's tremendous hatred, and I will stick with exactly what I said to Anderson Cooper.
Senator Rubio, your supporter, Republican Senator Jeff Sessions, said in response to Mr. Trump's comment last night, I'm sorry, Senator Jeff Flake, I apologize. Your supporters, Republican Senator Jeff Flake, said in response to that comment, Republicans are better than this. Do you agree?
Well, let me say, I know that a lot of people find appeal in the things Donald says because he says what people wish they could say. The problem is presidents can't just say anything they want. It has consequences here and around the world. And so let me give you one. 2 days ago, I met this extraordinary couple who are on furlough because they're missionaries in Bangladesh. It's a very tough place to be a missionary. It's Muslim. And their safety and security very much relies upon friendly Muslims that live alongside them, that may not convert but protect them and certainly look out for them. And their mission field really are Muslims that are looking to convert to Christianity as well. And they tell me that today they have a very hostile environment in which to operate in because the news is coming out that in America, leading political figures are saying that America doesn't like Muslims. So this has a real impact. There is no doubt that radical Islam is a danger in the world. I can also tell you that if you go to any national cemetery, especially Arlington, you're going to see crescent moons there. If you go anywhere in the world, you're going to see American men and women serving us in uniform that are Muslims. And they love America. And as far as I know, no one on this stage has served in uniform in the United States military. Anyone out there that has the uniform of the United States on and is willing to die for this country is someone that loves America, no matter what their religious background may be.
Mr. Trump.
Marco talks about consequences. Well, we've had a lot of consequences, including airplanes flying into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and could have been the White House. There have been a lot of problems. Now, you can say what you want, and you can be politically correct if you want. I don't want to be so politically correct. I like to solve problems. We have a serious, serious problem of hate. There is tremendous hate. There is tremendous hate. Where large portions of a group of people, Islam, large portions want to use very, very harsh means. Let me go a step further. Women are treated horribly. You know that. You do know that. Women are treated horribly, and other things are happening that are very, very bad. Now, I will say this. There is tremendous hatred. The question was asked, what do you think? And I said, there is hatred. Now, it'd be very easy for me to say something differently, and everybody would say, oh, isn't that wonderful?
Mr. Trump,
we better solve the problem before it's too late.
Senator Rubio.
Here we go. See, I'm not interested in being politically correct. I'm not interested in being politically correct. I'm interested in being correct. And in order to be correct on this issue, here's the bottom line. We do work. There is Islam. Islam has a major problem on its hands. It has a significant percentage of its adherents, particularly in the Sunni faith, but also in the Shia, who have been radicalized and are willing to fly planes into a building and kill innocent people. There is no doubt about that. It is also true that if you look around the world at the challenges we face, we are going to have to work together with Muslims who are not radicals. We're going to have to work with the Jordanian kingdom. We're going to have to work with the Saudis. We're going to have to work with the Gulf kingdoms. We're going to have to work with the Egyptians to defeat, for example, ISIS. It will take a Sunni Arab movement to defeat them. And so I think you can be correct without needing to be politically correct. We are going to have to work with people in the Muslim faith, even as Islam itself faces a serious crisis within it of radicalization.
Senator. Governor Kasich? Do you think Islam hates us?
No, I don't. I think there is a sect of this radical Islam that is really, really serious and poses the greatest threat to us today. There isn't any question. And that's why the whole world has to work together to make sure that we don't have proliferation of these weapons of mass destruction. But look, I was there and saw it when the Egyptian ambassador to the United States was in the Rose Garden bringing the Arab Muslim world to work with us to repel Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. The fact is that if we're going to defeat ISIS, we're going to have these countries. And they are Egypt, and they are Saudi Arabia, and they are Jordan, and they are the Gulf states. And we're going to have in some way or another, a rapprochement with Turkey. And I frankly think the Europeans went in the wrong direction when they rejected Turkey from joining into the economic sphere of Europe. The simple fact of the matter is, a lot of these Muslim countries they can't believe the stuff they see out of people who have distorted their faith. Look, the people who represent radical Islam, they want to destroy everything that we're about and other Muslims who don't share their view. But at the end of the day, we got to bring the world together, the civilized world, and we all speak with one voice to make sure that people who sit on the fence understand what civilization is, and we represent it, and equality and hope for everybody.
Thank you, Governor Kasich. Mr. Trump, I want to ask you about something else you said during the course of this campaign. You said that the U.S. has to, quote, take out the families of terrorists. When it was pointed out that targeting civilians is against the Geneva Conventions, you said, quote, so they can kill us, but we can't kill them? It is against federal, military, and international law to target civilians. So how will you order the military to target the families of suspected terrorists while also abiding by the law?
First of all, let me go back to the other just for a second. In large mosques in all over the Middle East, you have people chanting death to the USA. Now, that does not sound like a friendly act to me. As far as the families are concerned and as far as the law is concerned, we have a law. This all started with your question on waterboarding. We have a law that doesn't allow right now waterboarding. They have no laws, they have no rules, they have no regulations. They chop off heads, they drown 40, 50, 60 people at a time in big steel cages, pull them up an hour later, everyone dead, and we're working on a different set of parameters. Now, we have to obey the laws, okay? Have to obey the laws, but we have to expand those laws because we have to be able to fight on at least somewhat of an equal footing, or we will never, ever knock out ISIS and all of the others that are so bad. We better expand our laws or we're being a bunch of suckers, and they are laughing at us. They are laughing at us, believe me.
Senator Rubio, would you as president pursue a policy of targeting the families of suspected terrorists?
No, of course not. And we don't have to in order to defeat terrorists. The way you defeat terrorists is pretty straightforward. It's difficult to do, but it has to be done. When I'm president of the United States, the best intelligence agencies in the world that right now have been hamstrung, they're going to be expanded, and the best intelligence agencies in the world are going to find terrorists. And then the best military in the world, which needs to be rebuilt because Barack Obama is gutting our military. He's going to leave us with the smallest army since the end of World War II, and the smallest Navy in a century, and the smallest Air Force we've ever had. We are going to rebuild that military, and that military is going to find the terrorists and destroy them. And if we capture any of these terrorists alive, they're not going to have the right to remain silent, and they're not going to go to a courtroom in Manhattan. They're going to go to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and we will find out everything they know, and we'll do so legally.
Senator Cruz, you've talked about changing the rules of engagement in battle against ISIS. Would that include targeting the families of suspected terrorists?
No, of course not. We've never targeted innocent civilians, and we're not going to start now. But listen, Jake, I understand. People are scared, and for 7 years we faced terrorist attacks, and President Obama lectures Americans on Islamophobia. That is maddening. But the answer is not simply to yell, China bad, Muslims bad. You've got to understand the nature of the threats we're facing and how you deal with them. And yes, it is true, there are millions of radical Islamic terrorists who seek to kill us. We need a president commander-in-chief focused on fighting them. And I'll tell you frankly, one concern I have with Donald is that although his language is quite incendiary, when you look at his substantive policies on Iran, he has said that he would not rip up this Iranian nuclear deal. I think that's a mistake. The Ayatollah Khamenei wants nuclear weapons to murder us. I'll give you another example, dealing with radical Islamic terrorism. On Israel, Donald has said he wants to be neutral between Israel and the Palestinians. As president, I will not be neutral. And let me say, this week, a Texan, Taylor Force, he was an Eagle Scout, he was a West Point graduate, he was an Army veteran. He was murdered by a Palestinian terrorist this week in Israel. And I don't think we need a commander-in-chief who is neutral between the Palestinian terrorist and one of our strongest allies in the world, the nation of Israel.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Mr. Trump, we're going to come to you in a second, but wait, I want to go to Hugh Hewitt, who has questions on this exact line of subject.
Mr. Trump, I want to follow up on the quote that Senator Cruz used. You said you would want to be, quote, sort of a neutral guy. He did mention Taylor Force. He was a West Point graduate. He was a war hero. He was a Vanderbilt graduate student. He was killed in a Palestinian terror attack near Tel Aviv. Many others were killed. And the Israeli government says the Palestinian Authority is inciting this. Do you still want to stay neutral when the Palestinian Authority is inciting these attacks?
First of all, there's nobody on this stage that's more pro-Israel than I am. Okay? There's nobody. I am pro-Israel. I was the Grand Marshal not so long ago of the Israeli Day Parade down Fifth Avenue. I've made massive contributions to Israel. I have I have tremendous love for Israel. I happen to have a son-in-law and a daughter that are Jewish, okay? And 2 grandchildren that are Jewish. But I will tell you, I think if we're going to ever negotiate a peace settlement, which every Israeli wants, and I've spoken to the toughest and the sharpest, they all want peace, I think it would be much more helpful. I'm a negotiator. If I go in, I'll say I'm pro-Israel, and I've told that to everybody and anybody that would listen. But I would like to at least have the other side think I'm somewhat neutral as to them so that we can maybe get a deal done. Maybe we can get a deal. I think it's probably the toughest negotiation of all time, but maybe we can get a deal done.
Senator
As far
Cruz,
as, and by the way, just so you understand, as far as Iran, I would have never made that deal. I think it's maybe the worst deal I've ever seen. I think it's the worst deal I've ever seen negotiated. I will be so tough on them, and ultimately that deal will be broken unless they behave better than they've ever behaved in their lives, which is probably unlikely.
Senator
and that
Cruz
deal
and
will
Senator
be broken.
Rubio.
You know, we need a president who understands the national security interest of this country. The reason we are friends and allies with Israel is they are a liberal democratic country that share our values. They're our strongest ally in the region. We get billions in intelligence resources, billions in military resources. And the Palestinian Authority that Donald, along with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, say they want to treat neutrally the same as Israel. The Palestinian Authority is in a unity government with Hamas, a terrorist organization. They pay the families of these terrorists who murder people. And this is exactly the moral relativism Barack Obama has. And the answer is not scream all Muslims bad. Let me give you an example of a Muslim, for example, we ought to be standing with. President al-Sisi of Egypt, a president of a Muslim country who is targeting radical Islamic terrorists. He's hunting them down and stopping them. Our focus needs to be on keeping this country safe.
I want to go back to the Israeli government's assertion that the Palestinian Authority is inciting the convulsion of violence. Do you agree?
Well, that's undeniable. First of all, they've said they've encouraged people to do so. And you've seen the speeches of the Palestinian Authority president talking about how glorious this is that they're doing these sorts of things. But let me go back for a moment. The policy Donald has outlined, I don't know if he realizes, is an anti-Israeli policy. Maybe that's not your intent, but here's why it is an anti-Israeli policy. There is no peace deal possible with the Palestinians at this moment. There just isn't, because there's no one to negotiate with. The Palestinian Authority is not interested in a serious deal, and they are now in union with Hamas, an organization whose specific purpose is the destruction of the Jewish state. Every time that Israel has turned over territory of any kind, be it Gaza or now in Judea and Samaria, it is used as a launching pad to attack Israel. And that's what will happen again. These groups are not interested in a deal with Israel. What they are interested in is ultimately removing the Jewish state and occupying its entire territory. So maybe in 30 years the conditions will exist, but they do not exist now. And to have a president forcing the Israelis to the table is harmful to Israel and emboldens Israel's enemies.
Mr. Trump, a response, and we'll go to Governor Cook.
If I become president of the United States, one of the things that will be an absolute priority is, number one, protection of Israel, but also seeing if a deal can be made. The toughest deal, the toughest negotiation there probably is of any kind, no matter where you look, no matter how hard you look. But I would like to give it a shot. Very, very pro-Israel, nobody more pro-Israel, but I would love to give it a shot. And I have to tell you this, Hugh, I have friends, Israelis, non-Israelis, people from New York City that happen to be Jewish and love Israel. And some are very tough people. Every single one of them, they know it's tough, but every single one of them wants to see if we could ever have peace in Israel. And some believe it's possible. It may not be, in which case we'll find out. but it would be a priority if I become president to see if I can do
Do you
it.
agree with the Israeli government that the Palestinian Authority is inciting this violence?
Well, there's no question. They were saying that the Israelis intended to go to the Dome of the Rock. And, I mean, when you think about this, thank goodness we worked with the Israelis to give them the Iron Dome. And, you know, where they could protect themselves against all the missiles that were flying in. Could you imagine living like in Miami here and have people shooting missiles in? Secondly, there was just an article the other day, Hugh, that I know you're familiar with, where the Israelis are learning to train underground in combat because the Palestinians now, Hamas in particular, is digging these tunnels trying to get under Israel. They're coming at them from above. They're trying to come at them from under the ground. And I just have to tell you this. I don't believe there is any long-term permanent peace solution, and I think pursuing that's the wrong thing to do. I believe that every day that we can have stability in that region by supporting the Israelis and making sure they have the weapons and the security that they need with our 100% backing is the way to proceed in the Middle East in regard to Israel.
Senator Cruz, I want to stay in the region. Just this week, the head of U.S. Central Command, General Lloyd Austin, essentially said it's going to take a lot more troops on the ground to end the ISIS threat in Syria and Iraq. From the beginning of this campaign, you have said you will follow the judgment of military commanders in the Pentagon. So here's a commander saying we need a lot more troops on the ground. Will you follow that advice and inject Americans again into what is, in essence, a metastasizing Sunni-Shia civil war?
We need to do whatever is necessary to utterly defeat ISIS. And that needs to be driven not by politicians, but by military expertise and judgment. Right now, we're not using a fraction of the tools that we have. We're not using our overwhelming air power. We're not arming the Kurds. Those need to be the first steps, and then we need to put whatever ground power is needed to carry it out. But, you know, a question that actually Jake asked, and I'm glad to come back to it now, is rules of engagement. We have right now our troops engaged in combat, but President Obama has rules of engagement that are so strict that their arms are tied behind their back. They're not able to fight. They're not able to defend themselves. They're not able to kill the enemy. And I got to tell you, Hugh, I think that is wrong. It is immoral. And I give my word to every soldier, sailor, and airman and Marine, and to every wife and husband, every son and daughter, every mother and father, that will end in January 2017.
Governor Kasich, if it takes 20 or 30,000, if the Pentagon says that's what needs to be done, will you follow their advice?
Hugh, I've said all along and laid out my foreign policy. I'm going to remind everybody that 55% of the foreign policy experts in this country said I was the best to be commander-in-chief. I spent 18 years on the Defense Committee, Armed Services, and then I was in the Pentagon with Donald Rumsfeld after 9/11, in and out for a couple years. We absolutely have to win this with a coalition. The Arabs have to be with us. The Europeans have to understand that this threat is closer to them than even is as close as it is to us. And in addition to that, you have to be in the air and you have to be on the ground. And you bring all the force you need. It's got to be shock and awe in the military speak. Then once it gets done, and we will wipe them out, once it gets done, it settles down, we come home and let the regional powers redraw the map if that's what it takes.
Mr. Trump, more troops?
We really have no choice. We have to knock out ISIS. We have to knock the hell out of them. We have to get rid of it, and then we have to come back here and rebuild our country, which is falling apart.
How many are we
have no choice.
about?
I would listen to the generals, but I'm hearing numbers of 20 to 30,000. We have to knock them out fast. Look, we're not allowed to fight. We can't fight. We're not knocking out the oil because they don't want to create environmental pollution up in the air. I mean, these are things that nobody even believes. They think we're kidding. They didn't want to knock out the oil because of what it's going to do to the carbon footprint. We don't fight like we used to fight. We used to fight to win. Now we fight for no reason whatsoever. We don't even know what we're doing. So the answer is we have to knock them out. We have to knock them out fast, and we have to get back home, and we have to rebuild our country, which is falling apart.
Thank you, Mr. Trump. Let's turn from current conflicts to those who have served in conflicts. Senator Rubio, according to a VA study, of the 22 veterans who commit suicide every day, 17 of them have no connection to the VA. The VA believes that this lack of connection is one of the reasons for this tragically high suicide rate. What specifically would you do as president to make sure that veterans in crisis are able to get the help they need?
Well, first, let me say that 1 out of 4 calls to our office these days is about a veteran here in Florida that's struggling with a VA. My brother's a veteran. He's struggling with a VA. The other day we heard this horrible story. It was a headline in the USA Today, and it said, calls to the VA suicide hotline went to voicemail. Well, about a few days ago, we now found out that one of the gentlemen, one of the veterans who left a voicemail, committed suicide. And they happened to call him back the day after he died. People need to be held accountable for this. One of the things I'm proudest of is that in my time in the U.S. Senate, working with Jeff Miller here from Florida, in a bipartisan way, and I'll give him credit, Bernie Sanders was a part of this, we passed the VA accountability bill. And what it did is it created now a law that gives the VA secretary, because of the law I passed, it gives the VA secretary the power to fire people that aren't doing a good job. Senior executives should be held accountable if the VA outreach isn't working. The problem is no one's being held accountable. Even after we passed that law, no one's been fired for no outreach. No one's been fired for calls going to the voicemail. No one's been disciplined. No one's been demoted. When I'm President of the United States, if you work at the VA and you are not doing a good job, you will be fired from your job at the VA.
Governor Kasich, the Veterans Affairs Department is one of the biggest line items in the domestic budget. As part of its attempt to cut costs, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives just voted to try to reduce spending in the post-9/11 GI Bill. Should veterans' benefits be part of attempts to reduce the deficit?
I haven't seen the provisions of that bill, Jake. My initial instincts are no. And let me just say about the VA, when a veteran comes home, they ought to have access to health care wherever they want to go at any time, number one. Number two, the Veterans Administration needs to be restructured. It needs to be downsized and spread out. It needs to be so responsive to the needs of the veterans. And secondly, the Pentagon needs to share the information of returning veterans with the veteran service operations in the states and with the job people in the states so that when a veteran comes home, they can be linked with a job. And when that happens, that means that every veteran will get work because they're our golden employees. No veteran ought to be without health care, no veteran ought to be homeless, and no veteran ought to be unemployed in the United States of America.
Thank you, Governor Kasich. Let's turn to another issue of real importance here in Florida. Just over a week from now, President Obama will visit Cuba, the first time in 88 years that a sitting U.S. president will set foot in Cuba. Two of you on this stage have parents who were born in Cuba and moved to the United States. Let's go back to my colleague, Dana Bash.
Senator Rubio, Donald Trump agrees with President Obama in his decision to re-engage diplomatically in Cuba. The majority of Americans seem to agree with that as well. So why are President Obama, Donald Trump, and the majority of Americans wrong?
Well, I would love the relationship between Cuba and the United States to change, but it will require Cuba to change, at least its government. Today, it has not. The fact of the matter is that after these changes were made, there are now millions and hundreds of millions of dollars that will flow to the Castro regime. It will now allow them to become set permanent and in stone. They will now be able to carry out a transition where the military continues to run the country there. They'll put a puppet figure forward as their new president, and nothing will change for the Cuban people. There has not been a single democratic opening, not a single change on the island in human rights. In fact, things are worse than they were before this opening. The only thing that's changed as a result of this opening is that now the Cuban government has more sources of money from which to build out their repressive apparatus and maintain themselves there permanently. And we ask nothing in return. Compare that to the changes that were required in Burma. And by no means is Burma a perfect country. But at least when there was a democratic opening to Burma, they were required to make some democratic openings. When there was a diplomatic opening, it required democratic opening. And today, the former minority party is now the majority party in their legislative body. He asks nothing in return, and we are getting nothing in return. And Cuba and its regime remains an anti-American communist dictatorship, helped North Korea evade UN sanctions, is harboring fugitives of American justice, including people stealing our Medicare money and moving back to Cuba, all in exchange for nothing.
Mr. Trump, you said the concept of opening Cuba is fine. You've said the concept of opening Cuba is fine. Why do you agree with President Obama and disagree with what Senator Rubio just said?
I don't really agree with President Obama. I think I'm somewhere in the middle. What I want is a much better deal to be made, because right now Cuba is making, as usual with our country, we don't make good deals. We don't have our right people negotiating. We have people that don't have a clue. As an example, I heard recently where the threat was made that they want reparations for years of abuse by the United States, and nobody's talking about it, and they'll end up signing a deal, and then we'll get sued for $400 billion or $1 trillion. All that stuff has to be agreed to now. We don't want to get sued after the deal is made. So I don't agree with President Obama. I do agree that something should take place. After 50 years, it's enough time, folks. But we have to make a good deal, and we have to get rid of all the litigation that's going to happen. This was just a little story, but it was a big story to me, because they said, oh, here we go. We make a deal, then we get sued for a tremendous amount of money for reparations. So I want to do something, but it's got to be done intelligently. We have to make a good deal.
Senator Rubio, I know you want to get in, but just to be clear, Mr. Trump, are you saying that if you were president, you would continue the diplomatic relations, or would you reverse them? I
would want to make a good deal. I would want to make a strong, solid, good deal, because right now, everything is in Cuba's favor. Right now, everything, every single aspect of this deal is in Cuba's favor. It's the same way as the Iran deal. We never walked. All we do is keep giving. We give and give.
Mr. Trump, just to be clear, there is an embassy that you would have to decide whether it would be open or whether you would close it. Which would it be? In Havana.
I would probably have the embassy closed until such time as a really good deal was made and struck by the United States.
All right. First of all, the embassy is the former consulate. It's the same building, so it could just go back to being called a consulate. We don't have to close it that way. Second of all, I don't know where Cuba's going to sue us, but if they sue us in a court in Miami, they're going to lose. Third, on the issue of a good deal, I know what the good deal is. I'll tell you what the good deal now is already codified. Here's a good deal. Cuba has free elections. Cuba stops putting people in jail for speaking out. Cuba has freedom of the press. Cuba kicks out the Russians from Lourdes and kicks out this Chinese listening station in Bejucal. Cuba stops helping North Korea invade UN sanctions. Cuba takes all of those fugitives of American justice, including that cop killer from New Jersey, and send her back to the United States and to jail where she belongs. And you know what? Then we can have a relationship with Cuba. That's a good deal.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. Senator Cruz, if you become president... Senator Cruz, if you become president, would you reverse course and once again break diplomatic relations with Cuba?
Yes, I would. And, you know, I think this exchange actually highlights a real choice for Republican primary voters. When it comes to foreign policy, do you want to continue on the same basic trajectory as the last 7 years of the Obama foreign policy? When it comes to these deals, Cuba and Iran, they were negotiated by Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. There's a real difference between us. Donald supported Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. And what he said right now is that he agrees in principle with what they're doing. The only thing he thinks is that they should negotiate a little bit better deals. They should be more effective. I have a fundamental disagreement, and I think most Republicans and most Americans do, that we shouldn't be allowing billions of dollars to go to nations that hate us, to go to Cuba, to go to Iran, and to let them use those billions of dollars to try to murder us.
Well, if Ted was listening, he would have heard me say something very similar. I said we would not do the deal unless it was going to be a very good deal for us. And I think I said it loud, and I think I said it very clear. And I think after 50 years, and I have many friends, I own many properties in Miami, many, and I have many people that know and they feel exactly the way I do. Make a deal, it would be great, but it's got to be a great deal for the United States, not a bad deal for the United States. As far as Iran is concerned, I would have never made that deal. That is one of the worst deals ever made by this country. It is a disaster. So for Ted to say, I agree with that deal, I mean, it's a staple in my speeches that may be the worst single deal I've ever seen negotiated. So don't try and put it on me like it's wonderful, like I love it.
Senator Cruz, your response?
Well, look, I'll point out, first of all, it is a matter of public record that Donald supported John Kerry in 2004 over George W. Bush, and he supported Hillary Clinton, gave her 2 checks in a presidential campaign in 2008. And indeed, once she was Secretary of State, he described her as one of the greatest Secretary of States in history. And, you know, the point on the Iran deal, his answer to everything is if only someone smarter were in government, things would be better. No, we don't just need smarter people in government. We need leaders that are protecting American interests. And when it comes to Iran, Donald has said he would leave the agreement in place and try to renegotiate it, giving the Ayatollah Khamenei over $100 billion. That reflects you do not understand the radical Islamic terrorist that is the Ayatollah that wants to murder us. We need a commander-in-chief that understands our enemies, understands and doesn't give them billions of dollars to threaten our safety and security.
I was against the giving of the money at all cost. I said don't negotiate at all until you get the prisoners back. If the prisoners don't come back early, 3 years ago, one of the longest negotiations I've ever seen, by the way. If they don't come back early, I was saying don't negotiate. They come back early. What you do is you take it back and you say, either give us the prisoners or we double up the sanctions. And what we should have done is doubled up the sanctions and made a much better deal, because that deal is a disaster. But Ted, the money is largely gone because of incompetent and very, very poor negotiators. But that money, the $150 billion, is largely gone and already spent everywhere but the United States.
Let's refocus this back on Cuba. Governor Kasich, a pair of entrepreneurs from Alabama and North Carolina have just received approval to build the first U.S. factory in Cuba, making tractors for small farms. This is a direct result of President Obama's new policy in Cuba that we've been talking about. If you are elected president, would you encourage more U.S. companies to do business like that in Cuba?
No, I wouldn't. Listen, I think the problem with the administration, if you talk to our friends around the world, they say, what is America doing? You know, you don't support us. We can't figure out where you are. You won't arm the freedom fighters in Ukraine. We let the Russians trump up some excuse on the business of, Russian-speaking people. You had a red line in Syria. You walked away from it. You refused to fund the Syrian rebels. You undercut Egypt, and we ended up with the Muslim Brotherhood for a while. And then we turn our back at Netanyahu when he comes to Congress to talk about his concerns of the Iranian deal. Look, I know in human nature sometimes there's a sense that you make better with your enemies than you do with your friends. And you know what happens when you do that? You make a terrible mistake. You need to support your friends. You need to hold your enemies out here, and you need to negotiate tough deals. And the fact is, they need to understand who we are. The Chinese understand. They don't own the South China Sea. They have to stop hacking everything we have in this country, or we'll take out their systems. We will arm the Ukrainians so that they have lethal defensive aid. We will destroy ISIS. And Mr. Putin, you better understand, you're either with us or you're against us. We're not rattling a sword. You're not our enemy, but we're not going to put up with this nonsense any longer. And a strong America is what the entire world is begging for. Where has America gone is what many of our allies say around the world. I'm president. They're going to know exactly where we are, because we're coming back.
Thank you, Governor. While we're discussing issues of importance to Floridians, I reached out to the Republican mayor of Miami, Tomas Regalado, to find out what he wanted to hear from you this evening. Mayor Regalado told me, quote, climate change means rising ocean levels, which in South Florida means flooding downtown and in our neighborhoods. It's an everyday reality in our city. Will you, as president, acknowledge the reality of the scientific consensus about climate change? And as president, will you pledge to do something about it? Unquote. Senator Rubio, the Miami mayor, has endorsed you. Will you honor his request for a pledge and acknowledge the reality of the scientific consensus of climate change and pledge to do something about it?
Sure, the climate is changing. And one of the reasons why the climate is changing is because the climate has always been changing. There has never been a time when the climate has not changed. I think the fundamental question for a policymaker is the climate changing because of something we are doing? And if so, is there a law you can pass to fix it? So on the issue of flooding in Miami, it's caused by two things. Number one, South Florida is largely built on land that was once a swamp. And number two, because if there is higher sea levels or whatever it may be happening, we do need to deal with that through mitigation. And I have long supported mitigation efforts. But as far as a law that we can pass in Washington to change the weather, there's no such thing. On the contrary, there is laws they want us to pass. There are laws they want us to pass that would be devastating for our economy. Or these programs like what the president's put in with the Clean Power Act, or all these sorts of things that he's forcing down our throat on the war on coal. Let me tell you who's going to pay the price of that. Americans are going to pay the price of that. The cost of doing that is going to be rammed down the throat of the American consumer, the single parent, the working family, who are going to see increases in the cost of living, the businesses who are going to leave America because it's more expensive to do business here than anywhere else. And you know what passing those laws would have, what impact they would have on the environment? Zero. Because China is still going to be polluting, and India is still going to be polluting at historic levels. So I am in favor of a clean environment. My children live in South Florida. My family's being raised here. I want this to be a safe and clean place, but these laws some people are asking us to pass will do nothing for the environment, and they will hurt and devastate our economy.
So just to clarify, Senator Rubio, Mayor Regalado, when he talks about the reality of the scientific consensus about climate change, the Republican mayor of Miami, He's saying the scientific consensus is that man does contribute to climate change. When you talk to him, because he is the mayor of Miami and he has endorsed you, you tell him that he's wrong?
I would say to him that there is no law that they want us to pass that would have any impact on that. If you took the gift list of all of these groups that are asking us to pass these laws and did every single one of them, there would be no change in our environment. Sea level would still rise. All these other things that are happening would continue to go on for a lot of different reasons. One, because America is not a planet, it's a country. And number two, because these other countries like India and China are more than making up in carbon emission for whatever we could possibly cut. Here's what he will immediately, Mayor Regalado is a great mayor and a good friend, but here's what he's immediately going to start hearing from. He will immediately start hearing from families in South Florida who are barely making it by, and now their electric bill went up $20 or $30 a month. Because we've just made it more expensive to generate power.
Thank you, Senator.
That cost will be passed on to working families. I am not going to destroy the U.S. economy for a law that will do nothing for our environment.
Governor Kasich, what would you say to the mayor of Miami?
Well, I do believe we contribute to climate change, but I don't think it has to be either you're for some environmental stringent rules or you're not going to have any jobs. The fact is you can have both. In our state, we've reduced emissions by 30%. But let me tell you also what we're trying to do. We want all the sources of energy. We want to dig coal, but we want to clean it when we burn it. We believe in natural gas. We believe in nuclear power. And you know what else I believe in? I happen to believe in solar energy, wind energy, efficiency. Renewables matter. Now, it doesn't mean because you pursue a policy of being sensitive to the environment, because we don't know how much humans actually contribute, but it is important we develop renewables. A battery technology can unleash an entirely different world. So the fact is that you can have a strong environmental policy at the same time that you have strong economic growth. They are not inconsistent with one another.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Cruz, I want to talk a little bit right now about how you gentlemen see the world. Senator Cruz, Colin Powell this week said that the nasty tone of this presidential election is hurting the image of the U.S. abroad. He said, quote, foreigners of the world looking at this are distressed. Does it matter to you what the rest of the world thinks of the United States?
Of course it does. And we've seen for 7 years a president that has made the presidency and has made, sadly, his administration a laughingstock in the world. This administration started with President Obama sending back the bust of Winston Churchill to the United Kingdom within the opening weeks. Then he proceeded to go on a worldwide apology tour, apologizing for the United States of America. Our friends and allies quickly learned America could not be counted on. I'll tell you, when I travel abroad, when I meet with heads of states and defense ministers and foreign ministers, they say over and over again, it is hard to be friends with America. We can't count on America. America doesn't stand with us. And that is a disgrace. But the good news is, Jake, we've seen this before. We have seen a weak Democratic president undermine the military, weaken our readiness, weaken our respect in the world with Jimmy Carter. And in January 1981, Ronald Reagan came into office, and that can change overnight. It's worth remembering, Iran released our hostages the day Ronald Reagan was sworn into office. And America needs a president who stands with our friends and allies, as I will do, and who stands up and demonstrates strength to our enemies. That's why on day one, I will rip to shreds this catastrophic Iranian nuclear deal, because the Ayatollah Khamenei must never be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Trump, some of your Republican critics have expressed concern about comments you have made praising authoritarian dictators. You have said positive things about Putin as a leader and about China's massacre of pro-democracy protesters at Tiananmen Square. You said, quote, when the students poured into Tiananmen Square, the Chinese government almost blew it. Then they were vicious, they were horrible, but they put it down with strength. That shows you the power of strength. How do you respond to
that? Doesn't mean I was endorsing that. I was not endorsing it. I said that is a strong, powerful government that put it down with strength, and then they kept down the riot. It was a horrible thing. It doesn't mean at all I was endorsing it. As far as Putin is concerned, I think Putin's been a very strong leader for Russia, but he's been a lot stronger than our leader, that I can tell you. I mean, for Russia. That doesn't mean I'm endorsing Putin.
But the word strong, obviously, is a compliment. And many people would look at what the Chinese leaders have done and what Putin is doing as atrocities.
I used to think Merkel was a great leader until she did what she did to Germany. Germany is a disaster right now. So I used to think that. And strong doesn't mean good. Putin is a strong leader, absolutely. I could name many strong leaders. I could name very many very weak leaders. But he is a strong leader. Now, I don't say that in a good way or a bad way. I say it as a fact.
Governor Kasich, when you were a member of Congress, you were outspoken about the Tiananmen Square massacre. What do you think?
I think that the Chinese government butchered those kids. And when that guy stood in front, that young man stood in front of that tank, we ought to build a statue of him over here when he faced down the Chinese government. Now, I will tell you, I don't believe that we need to make China an enemy. They're a competitor. But I want to go back to 3 things they should do. We should have the heat on them to work in North Korea to get rid of that guy and the things that he's doing, number 1. Number 2, they need to realize they don't own the South China Sea. And I will compliment the administration for sending some carrier battle group into the South China Sea. And thirdly, when it comes to the issue of cyber attacks, we're going to have to beef up the cyber command. And they need to understand that if you attack us, we will defend ourselves, everything, including our grid. But if you do it, we have the capability to take out your systems. The president has not given the Cyber Command that authority. I will. And when it comes to trade, I will tell you this. They can't manipulate their currency. That will not be anything that I would allow them to get away with. And if I saw them doing it, I would take immediate action to make sure that the American worker is protected.
Thank you, Governor Kasich. We're going to take another quick break. When we come back,